The screams echoed through the metal corridors of Station OMEGA-7, piercing the artificial atmosphere like daggers through silk. Commander Sarah Chen pressed herself against the cold wall, her breathing shallow as she listened to the sounds of terror coming from the civilian quarters. Through the reinforced viewport beside her, she could see the massive shadow of the Korthak warship blocking out the stars, its hull bristling with weapons that could turn the entire station into space debris within minutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Korthaks had arrived without warning, their ships materializing from hyperspace like nightmares given form. They were 8 feet tall, covered in chitinous armor that gleamed like black oil, with mandibles that clicked incessantly as they spoke. For the past 3 hours, they had been systematically moving through the station, separating families and herding the younger inhabitants toward their transport vessels. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her sidearm, knowing it would be about as effective against Korthak armor as throwing pebbles at a mountain. The weapon felt pathetic in her grasp, a reminder of just how outmatched humanity was in this corner of the galaxy. The other species had made that abundantly clear from the moment humans had stumbled into the galactic community 20 years ago. The Valari had laughed at human technology, calling their ships quote, flying scrap heaps held together by hope and delusion. The crystalline Threnodi had dismissed human diplomatic efforts as the babbling of infants who barely understand the concept of civilization. Even the peaceful Meridians had shaken their heads sadly when humans applied for membership in the Galactic Council, suggesting they return in a few thousand years when they might be ready to participate in adult conversations. But it was the Korthaks who had been the most contemptuous. During the first contact ceremony on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, the Korthak High Commander had looked down at the human delegation and declared, "We have seen many weak species in our time, but none quite so pathetic as these mammals. They are soft, slow, and utterly lacking in any meaningful strength. They will serve well as livestock should the need arise." The human ambassador, Michael Roberts, had maintained his diplomatic composure despite the insult, but Sarah remembered the look in his eyes. It was the same look she imagined was in her own eyes now, as she listened to another child's cry from somewhere deeper in the station. Sarah had been stationed on Omega-7 for 6 months, as part of the Human Diplomatic Corps' ongoing effort to prove their worth to the galactic community. The station served as a neutral meeting point for various species, a place where trade negotiations and cultural exchanges could take place without the territorial complications that plagued most worlds. It was supposed to be safe, protected by ancient treaties and the moral weight of galactic law. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now hiding in the very place that was meant to demonstrate human capability and peaceful intentions. Omega-7 housed representatives from 12 different species, including 43 human families who had volunteered to live in this multicultural experiment. Among them were 15 children under the age of 12, bright young minds who spoke 3 languages fluently, and had become the unofficial ambassadors of human curiosity and wonder. Now those same children were being taken. Sarah activated her communicator with a whispered command, hoping against hope that someone in the command center was still alive to receive her transmission. Static filled her earpiece for several long seconds before a familiar voice crackled through the interference. "Sarah, thank God you're alive." It was Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's chief medical officer and one of her closest friends. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion and despair. "Are you somewhere safe?" "Define safe," Sarah whispered back, pressing herself deeper into the alcove as heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor ahead. "Marcus, what's the situation? How many of our people are still free?" There was a pause before Marcus responded, and Sarah could hear the sound of distant weapons fire in the background. "It's bad, Sarah. Really bad. They came in fast and hard, targeting our security systems first. Most of the station's defenses are down, and they've got control of the main docking bays. The Korthaks aren't interested in negotiation or ransom. They're taking the young ones from every species, but they seem particularly focused on the human children." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "What do you mean, particularly focused?" "I managed to tap into their communications before they shut down our monitoring systems," Marcus explained, his voice growing more strained. "They're not just taking them randomly, Sarah. They're specifically hunting for human offspring. Something about studying what they call the weakness of human parental bonds for future military applications." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Korthaks weren't just raiders looking for slaves or resources. They were conducting some kind of twisted experiment, using human children as test subjects to understand what they perceived as humanity's greatest vulnerability. In their culture, offspring were considered property of the state, raised communally without individual parental attachments. They viewed the intense bonds between human parents and children as a crippling weakness that could be exploited. "How many have they taken?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 11 of our children so far," Marcus replied, his voice barely audible. "The Peterson twins, little Amy Rodriguez, the Chen family's boy David, and 7 others. They've also taken young ones from the Meridian and Valari families, but the humans seem to be their primary target. Sarah, they're not just taking them. They're separating them from their parents right in front of them, forcing the families to watch. It's psychological warfare." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back the rage that threatened to overwhelm her tactical thinking. She had met all of those children personally. David Chen was a precocious 8-year-old who had taught her how to play a Meridian strategy game. Amy Rodriguez was barely 6, with a smile that could light up a room and an endless stream of questions about the stars. The Peterson twins, Emma and Ethan, were 10-year-old inventors who had rigged their quarters with harmless but ingenious pranks that delighted the other species' children. These weren't just statistics or casualties of war. They were individuals with hopes and dreams, and parents who loved them more than their own lives. "Where are the parents now?" Sarah asked, already dreading the answer. "That's the worst part," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "The Korthaks have herded them into the central observation deck. They're forcing them to watch as they load the children onto transport ships." Some of the human parents tried to fight back, but the Korthaks have weapons that can incapacitate without killing. They want the parents alive and aware, Sarah. They want them to suffer. Sarah's grip tightened on her sidearm until her knuckles went white. The central observation deck was 3 levels above her current position, accessible through maintenance shafts that the Korthaks probably hadn't thought to guard. It would be suicide to try to reach it, let alone attempt any kind of rescue operation. She was one person with a weapon that couldn't penetrate Korthak armor, facing an enemy that had been conquering worlds while humanity was still figuring out fire. But as she listened to another child's terrified cry echo through the station's corridors, Sarah realized that suicide might be preferable to living with the knowledge that she had hidden in the shadows while innocent children were taken. "Marcus, I need you to patch me through to Earth Command," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "Priority Alpha transmission." "Sarah, what are you thinking?" Marcus asked, alarm creeping into his tone. "The Korthaks will intercept any communication we send. They'll know exactly where you are." "Let them," Sarah replied, moving carefully through the corridor toward the nearest access panel. "I'm done hiding." The transmission to Earth took nearly 4 minutes to establish, routed through 3 relay stations to avoid Korthak interference. When Admiral Patricia Hayes' voice finally crackled through the communicator, Sarah felt a small measure of relief. Hayes was a career military officer who had spent her life preparing for scenarios that everyone hoped would never come to pass. "Commander Chen, this is Admiral Hayes. We've been monitoring the situation at Omega 7. What's your status?" "The station is compromised, Admiral. The Korthaks have taken control and are systematically abducting children from multiple species, with a particular focus on human offspring. They're using psychological tactics against the parents, forcing them to witness the abductions. This isn't a random raid, ma'am. This is targeted warfare designed to exploit what they perceive as human emotional vulnerabilities." There was a pause before Hayes responded, and Sarah could almost hear the wheels turning in the Admiral's mind. "How many human children are we talking about, Commander?" 11 confirmed taken, with 4 still unaccounted for," Sarah reported, checking her internal chronometer. "Based on their current pattern, I estimate they'll complete their operation within the next 2 hours. After that, they'll likely destroy the station to eliminate witnesses." "Understood. Commander, I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. 3 hours ago, we received intelligence that the Korthaks have been conducting similar operations on 7 other stations across this sector. This isn't an isolated incident. They're testing human responses to the systematic targeting of our children, gathering data for what our analysts believe will be a larger offensive campaign. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. They're using our children as test subjects for psychological warfare tactics. That's our assessment, yes. The Korthaks believe that humans' emotional attachment to their offspring makes us easy targets for manipulation and control. They think they can break human resistance by threatening what we love most. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What they don't understand is that they've just made the biggest tactical error in their species' history. Something in the Admiral's tone sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It wasn't fear or desperation, but something far more dangerous. Cold, calculated fury. "Ma'am, with respect, we don't have the military capacity to challenge the Korthaks directly," Sarah said, voicing what everyone in the human military knew to be true. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. A single Korthak destroyer could eliminate our entire fleet. "You're absolutely right, Commander," Hayes replied, her voice carrying an edge that Sarah had never heard before. "We can't match their technology or their firepower. But they've just discovered something about humans that no other species in the galaxy has ever had to face. They've threatened our children, Sarah, and that changes everything." Before Sarah could ask what the Admiral meant, her communicator crackled with a new voice. This one was younger, male, and speaking in the rapid, clipped tones of a tactical coordinator. "Commander Chen, this is Lieutenant Colonel David Park at Earth Defense Command. We're implementing Protocol 7 immediately. I need you to get to the station's primary data core and establish a direct uplink to our quantum communication array. Can you do that?" Sarah considered the route to the data core, mentally mapping the station's layout against what she knew of Korthak patrol patterns. "It's possible, but it will require moving through heavily occupied areas." "What's Protocol 7? "Commander, Protocol 7 is classified above your current clearance level," Park replied, his voice carrying an apologetic tone. "What I can tell you is that it's a contingency plan we developed specifically for scenarios where human civilians, particularly children, are threatened by hostile alien forces. We've never had to implement it before, but every simulation indicates it will be highly effective." "Simulations against what kind of enemy?" Sarah asked, already moving toward the nearest maintenance access that would take her in the direction of the data core. "Against enemies who think emotional attachment is weakness," Park replied. "Commander, the Korthaks are about to learn why every other species in the galaxy has eventually chosen to respect humanity, even when they don't understand us. They're about to discover that our love for our children isn't a vulnerability. It's the source of our greatest strength." As Sarah began making her way through the maintenance corridors toward the data core, she could hear the sounds of Korthak activity growing louder throughout the station. Their chittering communications echoed through the walls, punctuated by the occasional human voice raised in protest or anguish. Each sound drove home the reality that time was running out for the children who had been taken and for those who were still hiding somewhere in the station's depths. The maintenance shaft she was crawling through was barely wide enough for her shoulders, designed for automated repair drones rather than human passage. The metal was cold against her skin, and the recycled air carried the acrid smell of overheated circuitry and something else she didn't want to identify. Every few meters she had to pause and listen for sounds of Korthak patrols in the corridors below. As she moved through the cramped space, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with 8-year-old David Chen just 3 days earlier. He had asked her why the other species in the galaxy seemed to think humans were inferior, despite all the technological and cultural achievements that humanity had accomplished. Sarah had struggled to find an age-appropriate answer to such a complex question. "Sometimes, people think different means lesser," she had told him. "The other species have been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while we've only been doing it for a few decades. They forget that being newer doesn't necessarily mean being weaker. It just means we do things differently." David had considered this with the serious expression he wore when processing new information. "But different can be better sometimes, right? Like how I'm better at the Meridian strategy game than the grown-ups because I think about it differently." "Exactly like that," Sarah had replied, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove to be. Now, as she emerged from the maintenance shaft onto the deck that housed the primary data core, Sarah realized that humanity was about to demonstrate just how different could indeed be better. The corridor ahead was empty, but she could see scorch marks on the walls where security teams had made their last stand against the Korthak invasion force. The acrid smell of discharged energy weapons hung in the air like a memorial to those who had fallen defending the station. The data core itself was housed behind a reinforced door that required both biometric identification and a complex security code. Sarah pressed her palm against the scanner and spoke her authorization clearly, hoping that the station's computer systems were still functioning despite the Korthak takeover. The scanner hummed for several seconds before the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside the data core chamber, banks of quantum processors hummed with barely contained energy, their surfaces flickering with streams of data that represented the collective knowledge and communications of a dozen species. Sarah had been here before during routine inspections, but now the familiar technology seemed to pulse with new potential, as if it were waiting to be transformed into something far more powerful than its designers had ever intended. She located the communication array interface and began establishing the uplink to Earth Defense Command, her fingers moving automatically through procedures she had practiced hundreds of times. As the connection stabilized, Lieutenant Colonel Park's voice came through with crystal clarity. "Commander Chen, excellent work. We have a solid connection and are beginning data transfer now. What you are about to witness is the culmination of 20 years of preparation for a scenario we hoped would never occur. The Korthaks have made a fundamental miscalculation about human nature, and we're going to use that miscalculation to end their threat permanently." "Sir, I don't understand," Sarah said, monitoring the data streams that were now flowing between the station and Earth at unprecedented rates. "What kind of preparation are you talking about?" "Commander, from the moment humanity made first contact with the galactic community, our military strategists began developing contingency plans for various threat scenarios. We knew we couldn't compete with alien technology directly, so we focused on what makes humans unique. Our emotional bonds, our protective instincts, our willingness to sacrifice everything for those we love. The other species see these as weaknesses, but we've turned them into weapons." The data transfer was accelerating, and Sarah could see new programs installing themselves into the station's computer systems. Whatever Earth was uploading, it was unlike any software she had ever encountered. The code seemed to adapt and evolve even as she watched, rewriting itself to interface with alien technology in ways that should have been impossible. "The Korthaks think they understand human psychology," Park continued, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "They think that by threatening our children they can break our will to resist. What they don't realize is that threatening human children doesn't make us weaker. It unlocks capabilities that we didn't even know we possessed." As if to underscore his words, Sarah heard a new sound echoing through the station's corridors. It wasn't the chittering of Korthak communications or the sounds of energy weapons. It was something far more primal and infinitely more dangerous. The sound of human voices raised not in fear or despair, but in fury. The parents were no longer cowering in the observation deck. They were fighting back. Sarah activated her communicator's monitoring function and began scanning the station's internal communications. What she found made her blood run cold and her heart race simultaneously. Throughout OMEGA 7, human parents who had been separated from their children were breaking free of Korthak restraints with strength that defied biological explanation. Mothers were lifting security barriers that should have required mechanical assistance. Fathers were overpowering Korthak guards despite the aliens' significant size and technological advantages. "Sir, something's happening to the human civilians," Sarah reported, her voice tight with disbelief. "They're displaying physical capabilities far beyond normal human parameters." "How is this possible?" "Commander, what you're witnessing is the activation of dormant genetic sequences that humanity has carried for millennia," Park explained, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and scientific fascination. "When humans face a direct threat to their offspring, our bodies undergo biochemical changes that dramatically enhance physical strength, reaction time, and pain tolerance. It's an evolutionary adaptation that most species lost eons ago, but humans retained it because our survival strategy was never based on superior technology or innate physical power. It was based on our willingness to become something more than human when our children are in danger." Sarah watched her scanner as heat signatures throughout the station began moving in coordinated patterns. The human parents weren't fighting randomly or desperately. They were working together with a precision that suggested some kind of shared tactical awareness, moving through the station with purpose and deadly efficiency. The Korthaks are about to learn why no species in galactic history has ever successfully subjugated humanity through attacks on our children, Park said, his voice now carrying unmistakable pride. They're about to discover that when you threaten what humans love most, you don't create weakness. You create something that transcends individual human limitations entirely. On her scanner, Sarah could see Korthak forces throughout the station, beginning to retreat toward their transport ships. Their orderly advance had become a fighting withdrawal as they encountered resistance they had never anticipated and couldn't understand. Reports were flooding their communication channels in their chittering language. But the universal translation algorithms were having difficulty processing concepts that had no equivalent in Korthak experience. Fear was the closest translation for one frequently repeated term, but Sarah realized that the Korthaks weren't just afraid. They were encountering something that challenged their fundamental understanding of how prey species were supposed to behave. In their military doctrine, threatening offspring was supposed to create compliance and submission. Instead, they had triggered a response that turned their carefully planned psychological operation into a nightmare of unexpected violence. As Sarah continued monitoring the situation throughout the station, she began to understand the true scope of what Earth Defense Command had prepared for this moment. The humans fighting back weren't just parents driven by desperation. They were part of a coordinated response that had been planned down to the smallest detail, a response that used humanity's greatest perceived weakness as the foundation for its most devastating strength. The Korthaks had come to Omega-7, expecting to break human resistance by exploiting parental love. Instead, they had awakened something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. They had discovered that when humans protect their young, they don't just fight harder. They become something entirely different, something that no military doctrine in the galaxy had ever been designed to face. And this was only the beginning. The alarm systems throughout Station Omega-7 had been silenced for over an hour, but now a different kind of sound filled the corridors. It was the rhythmic pounding of boots moving in perfect synchronization, echoing through the metal passageways like a heartbeat made of steel and determination. The Korthak invasion force, which had swept through the station with the confidence of apex predators, now found themselves retreating step by measured step. High Commander Vexthul stood in the main cargo bay where the captured children were being held, his mandibles clicking in rapid sequences that his subordinates recognized as extreme agitation. The chitinous plates along his spine had darkened to the deep purple that indicated stress hormones flooding his system. In his 3 decades of military service, conquering 17 different worlds and subjugating countless species, he had never encountered resistance like this. The human offspring sat in organized groups within energy containment fields, their small faces displaying a mixture of fear and defiance that Vexthul found disturbing. Most species young became docile when separated from their parents, instinctively understanding their vulnerability. These human children were different. They whispered among themselves in their primitive language, sharing information and maintaining what appeared to be organized communication networks. 10-year-old Emma Peterson had somehow assumed leadership among the captives, using hand signals and whispered words to coordinate responses to their captors' questions. When the Korthaks demanded information about the station's defensive systems, the children remained silent. When they tried to separate the younger ones from the older ones, the children resisted as a unified group. It was behavior that defied everything the Korthaks understood about psychological warfare. Lieutenant Skexvar approached his commander with a datapad clutched in his clawed appendages. The younger officer's natural purple coloration had shifted to an unhealthy green hue that indicated fear overtaking rational thought. His report came in stuttering bursts of clicks and hisses that betrayed his deteriorating composure. "High Commander, we have lost contact with security teams 7 through 12. The human adult specimens have breached their containment areas and are moving through the station in coordinated assault patterns. Their physical capabilities appear to have increased beyond our initial assessments by factors we cannot accurately measure." Vexthul's head swiveled toward his subordinate with mechanical precision. In Korthak culture, battlefield reports were delivered with clinical detachment, emotional responses carefully suppressed to maintain tactical clarity. Skexvar's obvious fear was a breach of military protocol that under normal circumstances would result in immediate disciplinary action. "Explain increased capabilities," Vexthul commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that demanded absolute precision in response. Skexvar activated his datapad, displaying holographic recordings from various security cameras throughout the station. The images showed human adults performing feats that contradicted every piece of intelligence the Korthaks had gathered about the species. A human female designated as Rebecca Martinez had torn through a reinforced security door with her bare hands, the metal crumpling like organic tissue under impossible grip strength. A male identified as Thomas Chen had thrown a Korthak warrior weighing twice his body mass across a corridor with enough force to dent the opposite wall. Analysis suggests the human specimens are operating under the influence of unknown biochemical enhancement protocols, Skexvar continued, his voice trembling despite his efforts to maintain military bearing. Their muscular output has increased by approximately 400%, their reaction speeds have tripled, and they appear to be experiencing dramatically reduced pain sensitivity. Vexthul studied the recordings with growing unease. In the holographic displays, human parents moved through the station's corridors with fluid precision that resembled pack-hunting behaviors observed in primitive predator species. They communicated through subtle gestures and expressions, coordinating their movements without apparent technological assistance. Most disturbing of all, they showed no fear when confronting Korthak warriors armed with energy weapons and protected by combat armor. The High Commander had built his reputation on understanding the psychological profiles of enemy species. Prey races followed predictable patterns when their offspring were threatened. They either submitted completely to protect their young, or fought with desperate, disorganized fury that could be easily countered with superior firepower and tactical discipline. The humans were doing neither. They were fighting with cold, calculated efficiency that suggested extensive military training, yet intelligence reports indicated that most of these individuals were civilians with no combat experience. "Sir, there is additional data that requires your immediate attention," Skexvar said, his mandibles chattering with nervous energy. "Our monitoring stations have detected massive energy signatures approaching this sector from the direction of the human homeworld. Preliminary analysis suggests a fleet composition unlike anything in our tactical databases." Before Vexthul could respond, his communication implant activated with the emergency frequency reserved for direct contact with the Korthak Military High Command. The voice that filled his consciousness belonged to Supreme War Leader Korthak, whose authority extended across half the galaxy's military operations. "High Commander Vexthul, you will provide immediate status report on Operation Weakness Harvest. Our deep space sensors are detecting anomalous energy patterns consistent with previously unknown military technologies approaching your position at unprecedented velocities." Vexthul felt his spine plates shift to colors that indicated submission and uncertainty. "Supreme War Leader, the operation has encountered unexpected complications. The human specimens are displaying enhanced physical capabilities not documented in our intelligence files. Their emotional responses to offspring separation have triggered biochemical changes that we cannot explain or counter effectively." The pause that followed stretched for several seconds, a length of silence that in Korthak communication protocols indicated either deep contemplation or barely controlled rage. When Korthak's response came, it carried harmonics that made Vexthul's nervous system flood with stress hormones. "You are informing me that a species we classified as physically inferior and emotionally compromised has somehow gained advantages over Korthak military forces equipped with the galaxy's most advanced combat systems. You are telling me that creatures we identified as weak mammals have overcome warriors who have conquered worlds that resisted us for centuries." "The intelligence was incomplete, Supreme War Leader. We underestimated the correlation between human emotional states and their physical capabilities. When their offspring are threatened, these creatures undergo transformations that appear to be biologically hardwired into their genetic structure. They become significantly more dangerous than our projections indicated." Another pause, this one accompanied by background sounds that Vexthul recognized as emergency tactical planning sessions. The fact that Supreme War Leader Korthak was conducting this conversation while coordinating with the High Command suggested that the situation had escalated far beyond a single station's tactical problems. Hi, Commander. You will accelerate completion of Operation Weakness Harvest immediately. Secure all captured specimens and withdraw to safe distance. We have detected the approach of what appears to be the entirety of the human military fleet, moving at speeds that our physics experts claim should be impossible for their technological level. They will reach your position in approximately 47 minutes. Vexthul felt his entire worldview shifting like unstable ground beneath his feet. The human fleet that intelligence had dismissed as, quote, primitive vessels held together by inferior technology, was somehow traveling faster than Korthak ships equipped with advanced quantum drive systems. Either their intelligence about human capabilities had been catastrophically wrong, or something fundamental had changed about human technology in response to this crisis. Supreme War Leader, requesting immediate reinforcement. Current force strength may be insufficient to complete extraction while defending against potential human fleet engagement. Negative, High Commander. All available Korthak military assets are being repositioned to defend core territories. You will complete your mission with existing resources and withdraw immediately upon securing specimens. The humans have apparently been concealing military capabilities that pose potential threats to Korthak's strategic interests throughout this sector. The communication ended with an abruptness that left Vexthul staring at his reflection in the cargo bay's polished metal walls. In that reflection, he saw something he had never seen before in 3 decades of military service. Genuine uncertainty about the outcome of a mission against what should have been an inferior enemy. The human children in their containment fields had been listening to the Korthak communications with obvious interest. Emma Peterson was using her hands to sign information to the other captives, somehow translating the alien language for those who couldn't understand it. When Vexthul noticed her activity, their eyes met across the cargo bay. Instead of the submission or fear he expected to see in a captured child facing her captor, Emma's expression carried something that made Vexthul's nervous system trigger automatic threat responses. It wasn't hatred or defiance, both of which he understood and could counter. It was confidence. The human child was looking at him with the expression of someone who knew something he didn't. Someone who was waiting for something that would change everything in her favor. All units, accelerate extraction procedures, Vexthul commanded through his communication implant. We depart this station in 30 minutes, regardless of completion status. As if responding to his words, the station's internal communication system activated with a voice speaking in the human language. The translation systems rendered it into Korthak understanding, but something in the original tone carried emotional frequencies that the technology couldn't properly convey. This is Captain Rebecca Martinez to all human personnel. Operation Guardian Angel is now active. Repeat, Operation Guardian Angel is active. All parents proceed to designated rally points. Our children are coming home. The Korthak warriors throughout the cargo bay exchanged glances that conveyed shared confusion. Guardian Angel was not a term that appeared in any of their intelligence files about human military operations. The designation suggested emotional rather than tactical thinking, precisely the kind of sentimental weakness they had expected to exploit. What they didn't understand was that emotions had just become humanity's greatest tactical advantage. Dr. Elena Vasquez moved through the station's medical bay with the fluid grace of someone whose body was operating far beyond normal human parameters. Her hands, which usually trembled slightly from decades of precise surgical work, now moved with rock-steady precision as she assembled medical supplies and emergency treatment protocols for the children they were about to retrieve. The transformation she had undergone in the past hour defied everything she understood about human physiology. When the Korthaks had taken her 8-year-old daughter Maria, Elena had felt something fundamental shift in her body chemistry. Her vision had become sharper, capable of detecting minute details at distances that should have required magnification. Her strength had increased to levels that allowed her to tear apart medical equipment that normally required mechanical tools to disassemble. Most remarkably, she had developed what could only be described as enhanced spatial awareness. She could sense the location and emotional state of other humans throughout the station, particularly the other parents who had undergone similar transformations. It was as if their shared crisis had activated some kind of biological communication network that connected them at a level deeper than conscious thought. "Elena, this is Thomas," came a voice through her emergency communicator. Thomas Chen was an agricultural specialist whose son David was among the captured children. Like Elena, he had undergone physical and mental changes that transformed him from a civilian scientist into something resembling a highly trained military operative. I've reached the primary power distribution center. Rebecca and her team have secured the ventilation systems. We're ready to proceed with Phase 2. Elena checked her chronometer and calculated the timing for their coordinated assault on the cargo bay where their children were being held. The plan they had developed didn't come from military training or tactical manuals. It had emerged naturally from their enhanced cognitive abilities, as if their transformed brains were accessing strategic knowledge that had been dormant in human genetics for millennia. Confirmed, Thomas. Medical support is ready. How many Korthak guards are we facing? Approximately 30 warriors in the cargo bay, with additional support units stationed throughout the access corridors. They've positioned themselves according to standard military doctrine for defending high-value assets against conventional assault. They're not prepared for what we're about to do. Elena smiled, an expression that would have looked terrifying to anyone who knew her gentle, nurturing personality under normal circumstances. The Korthaks had based their tactical planning on the assumption that desperate parents would attack in emotional fury, making tactical mistakes that could be easily exploited by disciplined military forces. They had no experience fighting parents who retained their emotional intensity while gaining superhuman physical capabilities and tactical intelligence that seemed to emerge from genetic memory itself. "Rebecca, this is Elena," she said, switching communication channels to reach the former construction foreman who had become their impromptu tactical coordinator. "Medical team is in position. What's the status on the technical support systems?" Rebecca Martinez's voice came through with crystal clarity, carrying an undertone of controlled fury that made Elena's enhanced nervous system recognize her as an alpha member of their transformed pack. "Power grid access confirmed. We can shut down their energy containment fields on your signal. Michael has gained access to the station's atmospheric controls. We can flood the cargo bay with sedative compounds that will affect Korthak physiology without harming our children." The plan was complex enough to require military-grade coordination and technical expertise that none of them had possessed before their transformation. Elena found herself understanding biological processes and chemical interactions that should have required years of specialized education. Rebecca was manipulating engineering systems with an intuitive grasp of technology that contradicted her background in basic construction work. It was as if threatening human children had unlocked not just enhanced physical capabilities, but access to the accumulated knowledge and skills of humanity's entire evolutionary history. They were becoming what their ancestors would have needed to be to protect their young against threats that conventional human capabilities couldn't handle. "All teams, this is Rebecca. Intelligence from Sarah Chen indicates that the Korthak High Commander is preparing for immediate evacuation. We have a narrow window to execute rescue operations before they attempt to leave the station with our children." Everyone acknowledged ready status. One by one, voices confirmed their positions throughout the station. Michael Rodriguez had used his background in environmental systems to gain control of life support functions. Jennifer Peterson had somehow learned to manipulate the station's communication networks with expertise that rivaled professional technicians. David Park had turned the maintenance areas into tactical advantage points that would allow rapid movement between cargo bay access routes. Each parent had developed capabilities that perfectly complemented the overall rescue operation, as if their enhanced abilities had been customized for their specific roles in protecting their children. It was coordination that went beyond conscious planning into something that resembled instinctual pack behavior evolved over millions of years. "Medical team standing by," Elena confirmed, checking her supplies one final time. She had prepared treatments for potential injuries, trauma counseling protocols for the children, and contingency medical support for her fellow parents whose enhanced capabilities were pushing their bodies beyond normal limits. What she hadn't prepared for was the possibility that the transformation might be permanent, that saving their children might change them into something that could never return to normal human existence. But as she thought about Maria's frightened face in the cargo bay recordings, Elena realized that she didn't care about the consequences. Her daughter was coming home, and that was the only outcome that mattered. "All teams execute in 60 seconds, Rebecca commanded. "Remember, we don't just rescue our children. We make sure the Korthaks never threaten any human child ever again." Throughout the station, parents who had been dismissed as weak civilians prepared to demonstrate why humanity's protective instincts had allowed them to survive and thrive on a world where they were neither the fastest nor the strongest species. They were about to show the galaxy that when humans protected their young, They didn't just become better fighters. They became apex predators that no military doctrine in galactic history had been designed to face. The lights in the cargo bay flickered once, then died completely, plunging the space into absolute darkness that lasted exactly 3 seconds before emergency illumination cast everything in blood-red shadows. High Commander Vexthul's enhanced vision adapted instantly, but his tactical instincts screamed warnings that something fundamental had changed in the station's environmental systems. The energy containment fields holding the human children shimmered and collapsed without warning, their power sources apparently severed from primary systems. Emma Peterson was on her feet before the fields fully dissipated, her voice cutting through the darkness with authority that belonged to someone 3 times her age. Everyone stay together and move to the corners. Keep away from the center of the room. The Korthak warriors raised their weapons, targeting systems activated and ready to fire, but Vexthul found himself hesitating. Something about the child's tone carried harmonics that his predator instincts recognized as dangerous confidence. She wasn't speaking with the desperation of a trapped victim. She was giving orders with the certainty of someone who knew rescue was imminent. The first explosion came from the station's lower levels, a rumbling vibration that traveled through the metal framework, like the heartbeat of some massive creature awakening from sleep. Structural sensors throughout the cargo bay began registering stress patterns that indicated systematic damage to support systems. This wasn't random destruction or desperate sabotage. Someone was methodically dismantling the station's infrastructure with engineering precision. Lieutenant Skexvar approached his commander with movement patterns that indicated barely controlled panic. His natural coloration had shifted to patterns that in Korthak physiology represented fundamental system failures, the biological equivalent of a complete tactical breakdown. High Commander, we are receiving damage reports from all sections. The human adult specimens have gained access to critical systems throughout the station. They are not attacking randomly. They are implementing coordinated infrastructure destruction, designed to trap our forces while creating tactical advantages for assault operations. Before Vexthul could respond, the station's communication system activated with a voice that spoke in perfect Korthak language, using formal military protocols that demonstrated detailed knowledge of their command structure and cultural hierarchies. High Commander Vexthul, this is Captain Rebecca Martinez of the Human Defense Force. You are holding 15 children who belong to us. You have 60 seconds to release them unharmed and withdraw from this station. This is your only warning. The fact that a human civilian was speaking fluent Korthak military terminology was impossible according to every intelligence assessment they possessed. More disturbing was the tone of absolute authority in her voice, the kind of confidence that came from holding overwhelming tactical advantages. Human, you are in no position to make demands, Vexthul replied through the communication system, though something in his voice betrayed uncertainty that his subordinates recognized. Your species lacks the military capabilities to threaten Korthak forces. Surrender immediately or face the consequences of resistance. The laughter that came through the communication system sent involuntary fear responses cascading through every Korthak nervous system in the cargo bay. It wasn't the desperate hysteria they expected from outmatched enemies. It was the amused confidence of a predator who had just realized how badly its prey had miscalculated the situation. High Commander, your intelligence files are 20 years out of date. You've been studying humans during our introduction to galactic society, when we were still learning how to exist peacefully with other species. You've never seen what humans become when our children are threatened. You're about to receive a complete education. The second explosion came from the cargo bay's primary access corridor, close enough to rattle equipment and send stress fractures racing across the reinforced walls. Emergency atmospheric seals activated automatically, but instead of protecting the Korthaks from decompression, they trapped them in a compartment that was being systematically cut off from the rest of the station. Through his enhanced hearing, Vexthul could detect sounds that made his combat instincts trigger automatic defensive responses. Something was moving through the station's ventilation systems with predatory patience, cutting through metal barriers that should have required industrial equipment to breach. The sounds weren't mechanical or technological. They were organic, like claws or teeth designed for tearing through obstacles. All units, defensive positions around the specimens, Vexthul commanded, though his voice carried harmonics that his warriors recognized as doubt creeping into command authority. Prepare for close-quarters combat against enhanced human adversaries. The 30 Korthak warriors in the cargo bay arranged themselves in textbook defensive formations, their energy weapons trained on the access points where any assault would logically originate. They were disciplined soldiers who had conquered worlds and broken the resistance of species that had fought them for decades. Their tactical positioning was flawless according to military doctrine that had proven effective across countless campaigns. None of their training had prepared them for enemies who could move through solid walls. The first human came through the cargo bay's reinforced floor like it was made of paper, her hands tearing through metal plating with strength that physics claimed should be impossible for organic tissue. Rebecca Martinez emerged from the maintenance level below, with her clothing torn but her body unmarked, despite having traveled through spaces filled with jagged metal debris and emergency radiation barriers. She was followed immediately by Thomas Chen, who came through the ceiling using leverage points that shouldn't have been able to support human body weight. His movements were fluid and precise, showing none of the awkwardness that the Korthaks associated with mammalian physiology under stress conditions. Elena Vasquez entered through the primary access corridor, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came 12 other human adults, moving in coordinated patterns that resembled pack-hunting behaviors observed in the galaxy's most efficient predator species. Their faces carried expressions that would have been recognizable to any prey animal in the universe. Focused intensity that preceded lethal action. 15 against 30, Vexthul muttered, calculating tactical odds that should have heavily favored his warriors. They cannot possibly believe they can overcome trained Korthak military forces with such inferior numbers. Emma Peterson looked up at the High Commander from her position near the room's corner, her young face carrying wisdom that belonged to someone with decades of strategic experience. You still don't understand what you're fighting, do you? You think this is about numbers or weapons or military training. You think you can win because you're bigger and stronger and have better technology. The human child's voice carried harmonics that made Vexthul's threat assessment systems flood his consciousness with warnings. You attacked our families. You took us away from our parents. You made the single biggest mistake any species can make when dealing with humans. You threatened our young. Rebecca Martinez stepped forward, her enhanced physiology radiating threat signatures that made every Korthak weapon automatically target her as the primary danger. But instead of showing fear or hesitation, she smiled with an expression that belonged on the face of something that hunted other predators for entertainment. High Commander, I'm going to explain something that your intelligence files missed. When humans lived on our homeworld, we weren't the strongest or fastest species. We survived because we developed two traits that no other creature possessed. First, we learned to work together better than any pack or herd species. Second, when our children were threatened, we became willing to die fighting creatures that should have been able to kill us easily. She gestured to the other humans positioned throughout the cargo bay, each one standing in locations that provided optimal tactical coverage while remaining within protective distance of the children. Evolution taught us that sometimes survival requires becoming something more than what you normally are. Threatening human children activates genetic sequences that turn ordinary people into apex predators. Thomas Chen moved closer to where his son David was standing with the other captives, his eyes never leaving the Korthak warriors who had weapons trained in his direction. Every species in the galaxy eventually learns to respect humans, even when they don't understand us. The smart ones figure it out through diplomacy and trade relationships. The stupid ones threaten our families and discover why human parents are the most dangerous creatures in the universe. The tactical standoff stretched for several seconds, with both sides positioned for combat but neither making the first aggressive move. Vexthul found himself facing a decision that would determine not just the outcome of this mission, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the Korthak military hierarchy. His communication implant activated with an emergency signal from his ship's sensors officer. High Commander, the approaching human fleet has reached visual range. Sir, you need to see this immediately. Through his neural link to the ship's external cameras, Vexthul observed something that made his understanding of human technological capabilities collapse entirely. The approaching vessels weren't the primitive craft that intelligence had described. They were ships that seemed to have been grown rather than built, their hulls flowing with organic curves that suggested biotechnology far advanced beyond anything in Korthak databases. More disturbing was the fact that the human fleet was moving in perfect coordination without detectable communication signals between vessels. 12 ships were approaching the station in formation patterns that indicated shared tactical awareness operating at some level that Korthak's sensors couldn't measure or understand. "Hi, Commander," came another voice through his implant, this one belonging to his ship's weapons specialist. "The human vessels are powering weapon systems that our analysis computers cannot classify. Energy signatures are unlike anything in our tactical databases. Sir, we cannot determine what their weapons are designed to do or how to defend against them." Through the cargo bay's viewports, Vexthul could see the lead human vessel positioning itself between his ship and the station. It was smaller than a Korthak destroyer, but carried itself with the confidence of something that considered size irrelevant to combat effectiveness. Rebecca Martinez noticed his distraction and smiled with an expression that belonged to someone who had been waiting for this moment with patient anticipation. That would be the UES Retribution, commanded by Admiral Patricia Hayes. "She's a mother too, High Commander. Her daughter Emily is serving aboard one of those other ships in the fleet. Admiral Hayes has been waiting 20 years for someone to be stupid enough to threaten human children on this scale." The communication system activated with a new voice, this one carrying authority that made even Vexthul's enhanced physiology respond with involuntary submission reflexes. "Korthak vessels, this is Admiral Hayes of the United Earth Fleet. You are holding our children. You have 30 seconds to release them and surrender, or we will demonstrate why attacking human families is considered a fatal mistake throughout this sector of the galaxy." Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her medical training apparent in the way she began checking each child for injuries while maintaining awareness of the armed Korthaks surrounding them. "Hi, Commander, I'm going to give you some free medical advice. When Admiral Hayes says 30 seconds, she means exactly 30 seconds. Her daughter Emily is the weapons officer on that ship you're looking at. A mother and daughter team who have been preparing for this scenario since humanity joined the galactic community." The chronometer in Vexthul's visual interface began counting down from 30 seconds, each number representing a choice point that would determine whether this ended with Korthak retreat or complete tactical disaster. At 20 seconds, his weapons officer reported that the human ships had achieved target locks on every Korthak vessel in the area. At 15 seconds, his sensors detected energy buildups that suggested weapon systems beyond current understanding of human technological capabilities. At 10 seconds, Emma Peterson looked directly at Vexthul and spoke with the voice of someone who had complete confidence in the outcome of the next few moments. "You came here thinking you could study human weakness. Instead, you're about to become a lesson that gets taught to every species in the galaxy. You're about to discover why threatening human children is the fastest way to turn peaceful explorers into something that makes other predators run away in terror." At 5 seconds, Vexthul made the decision that would define the rest of his military career and potentially save his species from a war they couldn't win. "All units, stand down, release the specimens immediately, and prepare for withdrawal." The Korthak warriors lowered their weapons with obvious reluctance, their training warring with instincts that told them retreat was necessary for survival. As the children ran toward their parents, Vexthul watched something that would haunt his understanding of human nature for the rest of his life. The enhanced adults who had been prepared to fight 30 armed warriors to the death were instantly transformed back into gentle, nurturing parents the moment their children were safe. Elena Vasquez went from apex predator to caring physician as she knelt to examine her daughter Maria for injuries. Thomas Chen shifted from tactical coordinator to worried father as he gathered his son David into protective arms. The transformation was so complete and immediate that it seemed like magic rather than biology. These weren't soldiers who happened to be parents. They were parents who could become something more dangerous than any soldier when their children were threatened. Rebecca Martinez walked over to where Vexthul stood, her enhanced abilities still radiating threat signatures, but her expression showing something that might have been pity. "High Commander, you and your people are going to leave this station and return to your territories. You're going to file a report with your military command that explains why attacking human children is never going to be a viable tactical option." She gestured toward the viewports where the human fleet maintained perfect formations that somehow suggested both protection and barely restrained violence. "More importantly, you're going to make sure that every species in the galaxy understands what you learned here today. Humans aren't weak because we love our children. We're the most dangerous species you'll ever encounter, precisely because we love our children." As the Korthak forces began their withdrawal from Station OMEGA-7, Vexthul found himself looking back at the human families who were reuniting in the cargo bay. Parents and children embraced with intensity that made his cultural understanding of family bonds seem shallow and incomplete. The love he witnessed wasn't the weakness his species had intended to exploit. It was the source of power that could transform ordinary individuals into forces of nature. 3 hours later, as his ship departed the system under escort from the human fleet, Vexthul began composing the report that would change Korthak military doctrine forever. It would be a document that warned against ever threatening human children, not because humans were too weak to fight effectively, but because they were too dangerous to survive fighting when their young were at stake. Throughout the galaxy, the lesson would spread from species to species until it became universal wisdom. Humans could be negotiated with, traded with, even fought against under certain circumstances. But threatening their children was an action that revealed why humanity had survived and thrived on a world where they should have been prey. It revealed why, when humans protected their young, they became something that made apex predators remember what it felt like to be afraid. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.